I don't know if you're like me, but I can barely stand to read, watch, or hear the news. My takeaway is anger, annoyance, disgust, then hopelessness. Unless the story has a strong context, especially at least one paragraph on the history of how we got to this point, and one concluding paragraph on how I can respond in a meaningful way, the story's useless, an affront, deadly. I need advice which is something other than writing to an office holder or donating to an NGO staffed by people I'll never meet. The question I have is who is doing exactly the opposite of the story that's upsetting me, and are they having some success? I call the series of stories that I want to share with you pushback storytelling. Pushback storytelling aims to provide a toolkit to those watching on how they can affect the political process. I'd like you to look more closely at the graphic that's on your screen. It lays out possible political acts from the easiest to the hardest, from voting against your own self-interest to breaking the law. This series of shows is about everything from posting on Facebook to civil disobedience. You can get a copy of the graphic on the Facebook page, The Affirming Flame. A person who is pushing back on a number of fronts and a person who's been pushing back for years is my guest today, Ken Pentel. He was the Green Party's candidate for governor 3 times. He was also the candidate for governor on the Ecology Democracy Party. And he's the founder and director of the Ecology Democracy Network. And for full disclosure, when I was one of the producers for KFAI's public affairs show, Truth to Tell, Ken was a guest twice, and he and I also co-produced and co-hosted 2 Truth to Tells. So thank you for joining me. We've said Ecology Democracy Network 3 times thus far this morning.
So I'll describe it.
Could you give a thumbnail sketch of what the network is and some of its key policy positions?
Sure. Now, the Ecology Democracy Network, I'm the sole proprietor of it. It's a nonpartisan effort focused on structural change in the economy, the way we vote, and who influences our government. So we want to establish an ecology-based economy, so healthy habitats lead to a healthy economy. Second, we want to decentralize political power by way of the vote and go to proportional voting for the Minnesota House as our main goal. And so that means 10% of the vote for your party gets you 10% of the seats in the legislature. And then third, we want to remove big money and corporate interference in our government. So you and I, flesh and blood, are making decisions rather than these tools that were invented to serve us called corporations. So basically, we have strategies and tactics to achieve outcomes. So that, in a nutshell, is what we're working on.
Now, I think you and I both kept our carbon footprint fairly small this morning by using public transportation.
Yes.
I took the LRT to the Raymond station and walked here.
Yeah.
And I think you took the bus part of the way.
Well, I took a bike, bus, and train, and bike in between.
So would you share a little bit, because once upon a time when you were engaging the citizens of Minnesota, you went on a bike tour.
Yeah.
Can you tell a little bit about that tour?
Well, when I started the Ecology Democracy Network, I was at a point where I was frustrated with my history of organizing. And so I got on my bike to basically develop, to test out the network's mandates that I just described and to see if they worked out in the field. So I biked about 6,000 to 7,000 miles around Minnesota over a couple of years, testing out these ideas across all geographic regions of Minnesota, economic, social, cultural, and basically trying to get a sense of a consensus. Not build one, but just kind of, does this work? And across the state, I got positive responses to the mandates that put forward by the network when described in a way that people generally understood. So I needed to find the language too. So it was also developing a language around these ideas that worked with people. So in that respect, yeah, and also it's just a way for me to kind of deprogram from the commercial and the techno culture that I was born into, and to get out there with the horses and the insects and the beautiful trails in the state of Minnesota and the beautiful parks, and really try to explore the state a little bit.
I mean, it's one thing to sit in a chartered aircraft and fly into a small airstrip,
Right.
meet people for 20 minutes, be interviewed for 30 seconds with the local news, and then jump back in and do that day in and day out.
Right.
But riding on the bike, you feel every bump in the road. And if those roads aren't well maintained, you're the first one to know it.
Right, right.
So one of the things in current political life is the so-called chasm between urban and rural.
Right, right.
Now, you traveled all over the state, and your experiences, your mandates or policy positions for the network were well received. Now, did
Yes.
you see a sense, is your experience, that there is a chasm there? Or do you think that's more artifice or propaganda or confusion?
Well, there's definitely a chasm. I mean, because we've seen a migration in the last 80 or so years in Minnesota and around the world from rural to urban. And from what I'm learning as I educate myself more and more and so on, is that the structural changes we seek in the economy, for example, the way we measure the economy using the gross domestic product, in that measurement, there's a structural disadvantage for local and rural economies, and there's an advantage for urban suburban economies. So the way we measure the economy creates a gravitational pull from rural to urban. And so we've seen Minnesota go from about 52% rural population about 80 years ago. We're now down to about 17% rural. And that trend, according to the state demographer, is going to continue for the next 40 years. So in many respects, and then of course, add on to that, once you depopulate a region, then it becomes less attractive for banks to invest, private banks especially, to invest in those regions because there's less collateral. And so that's also created incredible strain and stress and a desperation in rural areas right now. And so there is definitely a rift, a chasm, or however you want to call it, that's going on. And from my point of view, of course, I consider this not only, I consider it dangerous in general. Because basically what happens is that when you create populations so big, like the metro region. So we see, the Minneapolis-St. Paul area, about 3.5 million people out of the 5.5 million in Minnesota live in the metro region. We're going to call it a 7-county metro area. And most of the people require external resources for survival. And so they pay money for food, energy, transportation, things like that. And that triggers the GDP. So it creates even a greater gravitational pull. You add population, you add a measurement that creates an advantage, and so on. And most people are detached or separated from the dependencies they have. So they don't know in the metro regions what's at the other end of the light switch, what's at the other end of the food on the store shelf. And if you don't know the consequences, or the measurement doesn't accurately reflect those consequences, then it can become more and more dangerous because we're extracting more and more of the raw materials of Earth at a more rapid rate. And that, to me, accelerates what I'm trying to stop, which is ecological overshoot, or living beyond carrying capacity, or living in a way that does not allow the Earth to replenish itself.
So one of the things about the genuine progress indicator, I mean, the gross domestic product is like trying to drive a car with virtually no instruments.
With no brake.
Possibly,
With no
possibly a
brake.
broken speedometer.
Right, with definitely only an accelerator.
And now we apparently have people who are consciously trying to roll back the odometer on us. But the point is that the genuine progress indicator provides people with a deeper, more palpable knowledge of the economy and how it's affecting their lives.
Right, and now the gross domestic product was initiated as a Depression era and a wartime measurement back in the 30s and 40s. It was supposed to live and die in that period. It got carried over. It's not an accurate measurement for our overall well-being. In the mid-1990s, the genuine progress indicator emerged as an alternative to the GDP. And in the genuine progress, just to give you an idea, in the GDP, a forest is only valuable when it's cut and turned to product, timber, chipwood. In the genuine progress indicator, a forest is valuable in and of itself, fixing carbon, fixing soil, filtering water, habitat for birds. So where the gross domestic product does not value ecological services or systems, the genuine progress indicator values the health of our habitats.
Now, how is that value quantified?
What would you have to do to replace the services, basically? So, you know, what would you have to do to filter that water? What would you have to do to maintain pollinators or birds or, you know, fixed carbon? What's the cost of losing that carbon into the atmosphere? You know, because, you know, we have a huge cost now associated with global warming. But in the gross domestic product, which is a measurement that just values economic activity without value, basically, it just, so when you increase, you know, carbon into the atmosphere, the GDP improves. It doesn't have an accurate signal. In the genuine progress indicator, it recognizes the limits of global warming, and it basically recognizes that it's a cost to us to continue adding carbon to the atmosphere.
But unfortunately, this instantly became political because there are a number of people who would prefer not to have accurate information about the effects of a lifestyle on the planet for people to comprehend easily.
So true. And the thing is basically what we're talking about is right now we see the price of things, but we don't see the cost. And there are powerful interests who don't want us to see the cost, right?
Or would like to obfuscate.
Right, because, you know, people get their electric bill and they see 10, 12 cents kilowatt hour on their electric bill, but that's the price of electricity, but we didn't add in the cost of nuclear waste for 10,200 to 200,000 years. If you added in the cost of nuclear waste in the bottom line of the electric bill, then we wouldn't be extracting uranium from the earth because we can't afford it. No one can afford it.
If you are just joining us, we are talking with Ken Pentel, founder and director of the Ecology Democracy Network. And one of the things I want to get to now, Ken, is one of the key things you do, and one of the ways I think about the network as a consultancy, where you share with people your experience, your knowledge, your skills, and help them so that they can begin to flourish and succeed in the political world.
Right, right.
So one of the things I'd like you to talk about is your state capital tours.
Okay.
Who you normally walk through the Capitol with, and what happens when you're on one of your tours?
Yeah, so basically I make myself available to any group of any kind. So, you know, it can be people that are part of like a critical thinking club, or if it's like the League of Women Voters or Legalize Marijuana Now or whatever. People that, you know, are just random individuals who like the idea of taking a tour.
But the key thing is that you would be willing to walk around and show people the ropes, an individual.
Yeah, there's no fee or charge for it. Yeah, I'm willing to take people around, and basically what I do in these Capitol tours is basically show people how things move around from, you know, through the nonpartisan offices, basically. So taking people to House information, how to check out what's going on, the agenda for the day, you know, how to get the right books to learn about legislators and so on, make sure they got that information. Then we go up to the libraries and we show people around where's the computers when they need computers. So they try to give people a sense of the functionality of the place. Where do you do the research? Where to go for history of legislative activity, things like that. We also show people how to get a bill drafted. So you meet your legislator, and they make a call up to House Research. And so we go to House Research, and we show people that office and where reports are that the House Research does. So if people need information on the things they care about, they can go there. So these are, and they also try to have people meet other people who are working there, so they build relationships. That to me is an important part of feeling confident at the Capitol, because a lot of people feel like they can't participate because it's so overwhelming, the complexity, the places to go, you know, how do you talk to people in a way that you don't sound like you're not aware of the issues? You know, a lot of people don't want to sound like they're ignorant and things like that. Well, a lot of my work is born out of ignorance.
But my experience when I have met with my representatives is, I mean, you have to be prepared to speak succinctly.
Right.
You're not going there for a 1-hour chat over coffee. These folks have intense schedules, so they're looking for succinctness.
Right.
So that to come in, have a clear idea of what you want to say it. And my experience is most legislators ask really good questions, clarifying questions.
Yeah, generally they do, and you know, they're asking about how to move. How does this? What kind of support you have? How are we moving this? What committee is it in? Things like that. And so, yeah, I mean, the meeting of the legislator is not the main focus of the tour, though.
Right.
You know, how to set an appointment, that we show people how to do that. How to reserve a room if you want to bring a group down there, we show them how to do that. We also show people, we take them down to the press corps. And so we show them how to reserve the room for a press conference, how to interact with the press people. So if they have a press release or a press statement, what's the appropriate time to get it to the reporter and so on. Also building relationships with the press, because the beauty is I have very little money, very little power. But the thing is, if you can learn how to build a relationship with the press, you can reach people in one location who can then send a message out throughout the whole state. So now you've really created an efficiency in moving your agenda in that respect. So that's another advantage of the tour. The other thing is that we take people to like the campaign finance office. So they learn about how do you register a political party, how do you register as a lobbyist, how do you investigate who's funding different groups or legislators, things like that. So that Minnesota Campaign Finance Board is a very important office to visit. We also will go visit like the state auditor office, where you can submit a proposal for him or her, but at this point it's still a him, to do an investigation on a state government agency that they feel is not doing appropriate work, or they want an audit of their activity. So we try to, you know, there's a lot of different bases
Well, the key
we cover.
thing is that you can provide a complete instruction manual on how to approach the state capitol and to either support legislation or try to work with a legislator to start legislation,
Right.
or how to move it through the system.
Right, and we also show people how to track it. So go to the House Index, right, or the Senate Information Office. So we want to break down the intimidation, because a lot of people feel overwhelmed because, you know, last year about $75 million was dropped on our legislature for lobbying. And average citizens, one, they don't have a lot of time.
Right.
When they go there, they want to feel like they can be effective. They don't want to feel like they're intimidated by the moneyed and the entrenched interests who are there every day, 24/7, 365, it seems like. And so we want to break down that form of intimidation, because it is the people's house, right? And and this is a great rift we have in the network, of course. I don't think corporations should be allowed to be down there, personally. I think it's illegal that they're there. I think the laws have been misinterpreted by the Supreme Court. In fact, I don't even think there is a law that was ever passed by the Supreme Court, or a case that was decided by the Supreme Court that actually said corporations should be allowed in the people's body. But that's a discussion for another day.
That's a discussion for another day. I'd like to begin to pull this to a close. And is there either a person who inspired you or an event that occurred that you suddenly were inspired to say, I want my life to be about making positive social change happen?
Right, well, I wouldn't say there was like a clear epiphany that took place, but generally, probably 1979, I was going out to Los Angeles to go into show business. That was kind of my thing. I wanted to, I thought life was supposed to be a musical or something. So I'm driving out there with my mother, and we're driving in the valley. We come in, we're going to LA, and we're coming through the valley, and the sky is filled with these like clouds that didn't look like normal clouds. And I said, Mom, those clouds don't look normal. And she says, I know, that's smog. And it was literally thick in the sky, covering the sun, and when the sun would ever peek through, it looked like the moon. And basically, I was like, you've got to be kidding me. I mean, everybody's going around like normal daily life, and I'm like sitting there stunned, because here I grew up in pristine Minnesota, skies were blue. I never really thought, I had never seen smog. And that seemingly set in motion, without me being fully aware at the time, but it set in motion a number of changes internally, where the stars no longer glistened out in Hollywood for me. It started to lose its sheen, and I started to become very kind of depressed and angrier. Why would we do this to our beautiful planet? Why would we do this to people? Or, on and on. It just started, these questions started popping in my head, and 6 months later, I was at Venice Beach. The beach was closed because there was a storm, and the floor of Santa Monica Bay basically regurgitated onto the shore, and you got to see what they dumped in the ocean and why they close 2,500 beaches every year in the United States. Because we dump highly toxic materials and dangerous materials in the ocean. That also sent a stun through me, and that started changing my psychology and my emotional makeup. And so eventually, these are the things, and then I went to my first Nuclear Regulatory Commission hearing and learned about nuclear plants, San Onofre, I think it was at the time, out in California being licensed. And I was like, and then eventually, so what happened is I left the Nuclear Regulatory Commission hearing. The no nukes activity was going on at the time. I went to the Hollywood Bowl, where there was a no nukes concert, 20,000 people inside the stadium, 20,000 people outside the stadium, and I was by myself, but I felt like I was with family. It was like one of those, that was kind of an epiphany for me, and it was like, we had 85 degrees, fires in the Hollywood Hills all around us, and I'm going booth to booth going, oh, I'm loving this. And the booth that got to me the most was Greenpeace, because I felt like here's this group going out there against all odds, taking on huge militaries, the nuclear weapons, whaling, it's like, man, these people have courage. They're doing the right thing. They're on the front lines. And so that kind of set, and so it took about 6 years for it all to kind of sink in. And eventually I signed up with Greenpeace and started knocking on doors. And I pretty much am still doing the same thing, in a nutshell.
Smog
Yeah.
was an inspiration. It appears, it appears that a number of people don't think that there is something sad about an America not having smog. So they seem to be doing their best to bring it back, to reincarnate it. So, given that,
Painful.
when you confront something like that, people who are actively trying to turn the clock backwards, how do you keep going?
Well, I don't think it's
what
people.
gives you hope?
Right. I don't think it's necessarily people trying to turn. I mean, yes, there are people that are doing purposeful acts of damage to the earth. So, but the structure that we participate in creates incentives to do the same thing. So as much as we want to take care of and restore the earth, the structure is like climbing a greasy rope. I want to get there. I want a healthy planet, but the system is inverse to the objective. So if you don't change the system, you ain't changing the outcome. There is no way. But the thing is that why I feel like I can wake up every morning and continue to do this work is because, one, I love the place I live. You know, I love the people. I love the habitats. I feel very grateful. I did nothing to deserve this planet. And I was born on this planet with millions and millions and millions of people, and we've been able to live generally healthy lives most all the people that are still alive. We're still given great gifts associated with the healthy habitats and our fellow creatures who are part of that healthy habitat. So for me, that is part of, reciprocity. It's giving back. It's giving service to what should be honored, which is this beautiful planet we live on.
So
and
your
because we're not having
actions-
this discussion without it.
So would it be fair to say that there's a nutrition to your actions?
Yes.
That it feeds you and continues to give you strength, that these sorts of actions of doing the network, taking people on tours.
I want to be able to translate the will of the people through our political system, and I want systems that do that. Because I feel that most people agree with a lot of what I'm doing, but the structural nature of the system basically creates these choke points and doesn't allow translation. So that's what I'm trying to do, is figure out ways, how do you create systems that allow translation of the will of the people to adapt and to lead towards healing our relationship to our habitat, our host, what many people call Mother Earth.
So, if I am watching this show and I have an idea for some legislation,
Yes.
but I don't know where to begin, but I have heard that you will take me on a tour
Yes.
and show me the ropes, how can people get in touch with you?
Well, go to the website, ecologydemocracynetwork.org. It's ecologydemocracynetwork.org. It's one word. Go to the website. You'll see events, contact information. My number, you can reach me, is 612-387-0601, 612-387-0601. And yeah, we can converse about setting up a tour or whatever. And that's a big thing. And then there's other discussions that obviously no way we're going to be able to have today. But we'll have, I have regular meetings and so on and so
that's
forth.
a key thing, that what people can get on your website is you do give classes which cover all of the policy points of the network, and people can learn that. So that's an opportunity for them to learn more about what you're doing and how they can either work with you or, most importantly, take what they've learned from you back to their organization.
Right, and just to think about it, when you leave a habitat alone, let's say in southern New Zealand where there was overfishing, and you let it restore itself, it will restore itself. It will regenerate, and you'll see diversity of species and so on. That's the same thing with humans. There are people all over this planet that are doing the same thing, working on restoring and regenerating and creating balance, because there's so much love and there's so much happiness and so much care all the time on this planet, and we should honor that.
Ken, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. You got it, Cal. Thank you, yeah.
So, you can post comments, questions, suggest topics or guests for future shows by going on Facebook to a page called The Affirming Flame. The next time I host the forum, we'll have a journalist pushing back against pushback storytelling and folks who have been pushing against voter apathy for almost 100 years. We'll have a representative from the League of Women Voters. I hope you'll join us. I'm Kel Heyl. Thank you.